Alright, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, Mike here with Useful Garage. So, this is part 2 of benchtop power supply, and I've done a little bit of tinkering off camera and come up with exactly what I want to do with this here. So, I've gone ahead and re-zip tied the big bundle of wires back to the metal case here after getting them all organized in such a fashion that if we look from the end here, they all kind of come out in their own little area. All right, so every little bundle is done like that, and for me that just makes it this is probably 3/4 the diameter as it was from how they had it zip tied at the factory. It kind of brought it all together. And if you look down into the power supply, kind of back in here, all the sets of wires, and even if we look on the underside down here, like you can see where all the yellows connect, they kind of all come out in their little groups, and then they just, when they put all the plugs on for the motherboard, well, for being in a computer, they're all just mixed up and tangled together, and it looks like shit, and I don't like it. So I've redone it. So these bundles we saw last time. So this is the two new bundles. Well, and this one is. These are the ones that, for what I'm doing, we're not using negative voltage leads and stuff in this. What exactly is what, I don't know, because I'm not using it. So anyways, so what I've done here is I've got two new bundles. I've got one of the blacks, which is a 12 volt, well, a ground. It's a reference, 0 volt, not 12 volt. And then this is the trigger wire for the power supply. So when this gets a ground, it will turn on. And I went ahead and I crimped some ring terminals on here for a switch. That was part of what I did while I was off camera. I was tinkering with switches. If you watch the computer teardown video for parts, there was this switch was the one that was on the front. And I thought, by the way that it sounds, that it was a latching push-button switch. Meaning once you push it, it latches the contacts of the switch, and when you push it again, it unlatches. Not the case. This is just a momentary switch. So I had a couple other ones up here in my storage bin that I messed around with, and finally came to a grossly oversized kind of automotive style toggle switch. But it works. So I'll go ahead and hook that up for you. And on these kind of switches with just two terminals, it doesn't matter what wire you hook to what side. Now you can get toggle switches like this that have an LED in them, and those it does matter, but it'll say right on the switch what is what. And the main purpose for that is to turn on the LED. And usually all that is you have a normal loop like this, and then you have one more in the middle that is your ground for the LED that's in the switch. In a power supply like this, that won't work, because in a car you have a constant ground. Being a chassis body, it's all hooked all the time to the negative battery terminal. So there's always a completion of the circuit there on the ground side. Well, this, being a switched power supply, this is not always hooked up to ground. Now it could be on some, if it's grounded, out through the cable, it may be. So then the other thing I've done is on the front of that old computer that we tore down, there was a couple of LEDs. There was this green one, and I don't know what I did with the other one. I think it's in the bin, but buried. Oh yeah, it's in the back of the bin. There was a 2-color one that was green and yellow, and that one had 3 wires. This one just has 2. So what I've done over here with my off-camera tinkering is figured out what I can use to power that. So this is one of the 3.3 volt positives here. So strip that, give her a nice twist for testing purposes. Same here. Strip this ground, give it a nice twist, and adjust this so everybody can see what the hell I'm doing here. Okay, so we've got a 3.3 here and a ground. We've also got one of the 12 volts. I'll show you what that's for here in just a second. Get this one stripped. Nice twist. Okay, so I figured out on this, and you may want to tinker with it to figure out exactly what's what for your LED wire colors. So on this one, the red is the positive, the white is the ground. So I'm going to go ahead and twist those onto their respective wires. Okay, and so remember, this orange is the 3.3 volt. So it's low voltage. Whether or not this LED has an inline resistor, I don't know. It might, but I kind of tend to doubt it. But I ran this just sitting here on the bench, just as you see it, for 20 minutes and didn't have any problems. So, also from that computer, fan. This is a 12 volt DC. See if we can get this to focus. Still using the cell phone here, people. No. So it's a 12 volt DC, 0.15 amp. So it's 150 milliamps, which is not a lot of power. So this, and I tried this on the 5 volt, and it just doesn't have enough oomph. So that's what our yellow wire here is going to be for. Twist these, take our yellow, that. Okay, so everything's hooked up. And when you're doing stuff like this for testing on a bench, make sure that none of your ends are touching. And these are just here to hold the LED in frame. And then I'll put the fan right there. Okay, so we're going to go ahead, our switch is off, and we're going to plug this in. Now on this power supply, it's an older one, so it doesn't have, oh, our switch was on. It doesn't have a switch on the back. So you could, if you have a switch on the back and you want to use that for your power, you know, you're turning your unit on and off, you could just take these 2 wires, connect them together, the green and one of the blacks, and when you flip the switch on the back, it'll power up like you hit the power button in a computer. This one does not. This is old school. This computer that I tore apart was built in 1999, I believe. So there's no switch on the back. It's kind of an old school power supply. So, my reasoning on the fan. Some people are going to be, oh, there's already a fan in the power supply. Yes, there is. But you have to remember that this power supply came out of a computer that's going to have, usually at minimum, 2 more fans, which that case did have 2. It was this one and this little CPU fan. So you have another fan, even though that this is sucking, the way that this was configured in that case, it's pulling air into the case. It's still kind of back charging, if you will, the power supply fan, putting fresh air to it so that it can then exhaust it out. This is an exhaust on this. Check yours. It may be an intake, but the only difference that's going to make in this is which direction you place this fan. So, if we flip our switch here, you can see our LED has turned on, and this is just the green one. And our fan is turned on. as well. So this fan right now is blowing this way, and that's the way that I'm going to set it up in the case that I'm going to build for this. I will not be using the factory shell, if you will, of the power supply to mount everything in. So that's where we're at right now. I've got to start. What did I do? I don't know what I did. Oh, I got a couple of exposed wires over here. See? That's why you make sure your wires don't touch that right there. There's obviously some kind of fault detection in the power supply, which is cool, because if you accidentally the wrong wires together, this one at least will turn itself off, which is awesome. So this is where we're at right now. Everything's kind of preliminarily, I guess, wired. So we have an indicator light for when it's on. I tried to figure out a way to use that multicolor LED for an indicator when it was off as well, but couldn't quite figure that out. I don't think that there's any kind of DC power running through this particular power supply when it is powered off, which makes sense. It's going to keep it from using too much power. So, and then also, even if I had the other LED running all the time, it is going to use a little bit of electricity if it's plugged in, you know, which as much of that as you can minimize, better for as far as your power bill goes. So, part 2, preliminary wiring. So green and black together, either to a switch or together, is going to make your power supply turn on and run. And then 3.3 volt orange and a black ground for an indicator LED. And this one doesn't get warm just sitting here. So I've got my fingers right on it, and it's barely warm. No warmer than it is outside. And then a 12 volt yellow, and you can use the same ground as your LED for an extra fan. So, and to me, the extra fan is just going to make this unit run that much cooler. And this fan is pretty substantially larger than the one that's in here. This is probably a 90 millimeter fan, and that's probably a 70. It's almost an inch larger. So, anyways, that's where we're at. Keep your eyes out for part 3 of the benchtop power supply from Useful Garage. Thanks. Have a good one.